This is Winnipeg Sports Talk Daily with Andrew Hustler Paterson and Michael Remis.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to a Thursday edition of Winnipeg Sports Talk Daily. Jets back in action tomorrow night. One final game before the break for the Four Nations tournament, which will feature Connor Hellebuck and Kyle Connor for Team USA and Josh Morrissey for Team Canada. We got a little bit of an update on Sidney Crosby. We did kind of speak about the potential of Mark Scheifele being a late add if one of the Canadian forwards wasn't able to go. We'll touch on that as well a little bit later on. But with the Jets being off for a couple days, we'll certainly dive into a bunch of Jets topics, more off the ice. Murat has a new piece in The Athletic on what the skyrocketing cap means for the Jets and pending UFAs like Nikolai Ehlers and Neil Pionk. So we'll have Murat on the program to talk about that. And we're going to get into some football. It's been a busy week in the Canadian Football League. And the big news yesterday was the salary cap unexpectedly going up $400,000. Justin Dunk of 3 Down Nation will join us. We'll find out what that means, what reverberations there will be around the league, and are the deals that were done earlier this week based on a cap that has now increased. Could those deals potentially change? Could those players revisit, i.e. a Kenny Lawler, revisit, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers based on a little more money to spend? We'll get to all of that. We'll get his thoughts on the Super Bowl and with the big game coming up on Sunday. Our pal Chris Meaney is going to jump on the program. Now, Meaney, of course, is the prop king. He is your go-to guy for picks and props at NHL.com and NHL Fantasy. Meaney's also an Eagles hardo. So I'm very much looking forward to talking about the big game with Chris a little later on as well. Quick note, though, for you. Coming off his shutout on Tuesday's game against the Carolina Hurricanes, don't miss tomorrow's show because we will have marbles and we'll have some other fun stuff. We'll get ready for the big game with Hacksaw and Davis Sanchez, but Eric Comrie's going to jump on the program tomorrow with us as well. So I think everyone loves listening to Eric talk about anything. So we'll talk hockey, we'll talk about the game on the weekend, the season so far, and we'll get his thoughts on Eagles and Chiefs in the Super Bowl on the weekend. But just as we get going and welcome in Michael Remis, welcome to everybody in chat. Hit that thumbs up button if you haven't already. And make sure you've subscribed to the channel. Shout out to all you podcast listeners. And a big thanks to the sponsors that make WST happen each and every day. Of course, Princess Auto, Coolbet Canada, Rollies Transfer, Manitoba Battery, fansfirst.ca, F Apparel, Canadian Club, Wallace & Wallace, the Winnipeg Jets, Little Brown Jug, Royal Sports, and Boston Pizza. And hey, don't forget tomorrow, WST Game of the Month. Last chance to see the Jets for a couple weeks. And our first Friday night game of the year. What a great way to finish off the week, getting together with the Winnipeg Sports Talk crew. Get tickets while they last, before they're gone. WinnipegJets.com/WST. And hopefully we'll see you tomorrow in Section 316. Let's get Michael Remis in here and get things going. Remo, what's up?
Just figuring out what's going on today. The Jets on the ice. Not really much to talk about. The team's great. It's like every day is like, how great are the Jets for 2 hours? No line changes. Injuries haven't changed. So, gearing up for the Four Nations, discussing a little, CFL Free Agency. That's really surprising stuff about the cap going up. I'm really excited to have Justin Dunk on to clear everything up, what's going on here. And the Bombers did have a signing today as well. These aren't actually signed. Like, they're just handshake deals that will be signed when free agency officially opens Feb 11. It was Jareth Stearns, the receiver. So we'll hear more about Justin. He was in Saskatchewan last year. Justin did some Rough Riders coverage, but long way of saying feeling good, Huss. No Jets hockey tonight, so we'll have a night off before WST night tomorrow. Already getting my wardrobe ready.
Yeah, I actually love the schedule this week. With the Tuesday game, right when I got back, right back into it, and then a couple days in between. And listen, I love the Thursday games, but Friday is the weekend, and without games happening beyond Friday, let's finish it off. And Matt, 7 wins in a row. This game tomorrow against New York is going to be a good one, though, because as bad as the Islanders looked at times earlier this season, they're coming in winning 8 of their last 9 games. And if you look at the standings, the Islanders, because of their great play as of late, have actually moved back into striking distance for, that final wild card spot. The East is going to go right down to the final week of the season. You can pretty much count that the Panthers, the Maple Leafs, I would almost say the Lightning, but the Sens now have a spot in the top 3 right now of the Atlantic with how well they've been playing as of late, winners of 7 of their last 10. And they're actually playing again against Tampa tonight, a massive, massive game. If they were able to beat Tampa, they'd push themselves to 4 points up on the Lightning. Tampa can tie them with a win in regulation tonight. And Tampa does have 2 games in hand. But, Detroit, Boston, Columbus, the Islanders, the Rangers, all seemingly fighting for the last wild card spot and potentially the second wild card spot, depending on what happens with Tampa and Ottawa. So a busy night tonight in the National Hockey League, but we won't have the Jets playing. That's tomorrow, a Friday night game. We'll be up in 316. It should be a heck of a lot of fun. But, it's so funny, Remis, as I talked at the start of yesterday's show, just an absolutely magical run for this Winnipeg Jets team. Through 55 games, they're number 1 in just about everything. And yet all anyone was talking about yesterday was the fact that almost half the NHL has the Jets on their no-trade list. I don't know why. I was on a couple shows in other markets and people asking me about it, and I'm just I don't care. It is what it is. But I did like your note, and we'll have to talk to Murat about this, of how it was such a featured question right at the top of the player poll. Who can they crap on? Winnipeg. Well, I think Winnipeg's getting the last laugh right now, and so are the players right now in that Jet dressing room. Guys like Hellebuck and Scheifele and Dylan DeMello and Josh Morrissey that ignored the noise, committed here, and have now become cornerstones of a team that is at the top of the NHL standings.
Yeah, and I note a comment here from Chips McGee in chat. Why does the Athletic go out of their way to embarrass Winnipeg with these player polls? Seems mean spirit. I have no problem with the question and them doing player polls about where you want to put. We know what the answer is going to be every year, but that's fine. But for them to put it number 1, to lead the article off, that's it does seem like they're going out of their way. But again, you look at all the players who've signed here, who've come in and signed. Like Nooner Niederreiter or Connor Hellebuck and Mark Scheifele. So I don't obviously the players who have come in and signed here have no problem. And I do think it's the players on the road. Maybe you're staying downtown and it's, I don't know, they have a negative experience when you come in the winter. I don't know. I don't know if there's anything you can do. I don't really care. I saw this. It wasn't a surprise. I'm not mad about it. I did enjoy some of the other comments from players who said, one player said, honestly, I wouldn't even mind Winnipeg. It's not that nice, but I just hate Philly. I hate Philly. I can't stand it. I can't stand everything about Philly. And I don't know. I think the team's done well. Players want to win. And if you want to win and be in first place, you'll come here. So I don't know. I don't think it's worth wasting air on. I saw it and I was like, yeah, okay. And Jesse Pollock had a nice Twitter rant yesterday, just saying, look at all the players who've come and signed contracts. They're in first place. Don't you want to come and win? Or do you just care about, low taxes and collecting a paycheck?
Well, and you know, and I have to laugh at, you know, some of the loudest critics of Kevin Cheveldayoff over the last number of years. I mean, that Fire Chevy crew. Like, if you really, like, this is a perfect example, shining a light on why this general manager job might be the toughest one in the NHL. I mean, you're not on an even playing field with the rest of your counterparts. You know, you're in a lot of ways, you know, negotiating or dealing with one hand tied behind your back. And the fact that they've just accepted it, moved forward, created a culture here that has been one that guys want to stick around and want to be a part of, and they're winning. And, you know, it's a credit to him, the entire staff of what they've done. But I think, you know, much like what we talked about with Sawyer yesterday, Remo, you know, there's a lot of credit to be doled around the entire organization. I mean, right up to ownership, the way they treat players, the fact that players are willing to stick around once they get here and see what this team and this city is about, that want to stay. But I mean, I don't think there's any doubt that Kevin Cheveldayoff's job when it comes to player acquisition, re-signing guys, all of those things is a heck of a lot harder than most of the other spots in the NHL. And the fact that this team is where it is in the standings, I think, is a pretty impressive feather in the cap of the guy calling the shots for the Winnipeg Jets as they go into the break as the top team in the NHL.
Yeah, and again, you look at all the players that he's kept, that have re-signed here. You know, Scheifele, Hellbuck, Ehlers is signed, Connor. And you look at a guy like Dylan DeMello, who they traded for, signed. I mentioned, Niederreiter, Domestikov as well. Even Colin Miller, they gave him a trade for him, didn't play him, still signed. I guess they gave him a 2-year deal. That was incentive enough. But, players have come, and we're going to have Eric Comrie on tomorrow. He's come back multiple times. So, I don't know what you can do. You can try to put together a winning team. Like Paul Stastny waived his no trade clause to come here. Nate Schmidt as well. I saw Dylan DeMello on a podcast with Jamie Thomas. He's chosen to raise his family here, close to the rink, affordable cost of living. There's certainly a lot of positives, and I don't know. Like, again, this is some athletic player poll. I do think it's like ridiculous that that's the leadoff topic, but I understand people. When you're playing fantasy hockey, talking about who's going to go what. When you see a guy with a no trade clause, Winnipeg is more likely than not going to be on it. At least 48% chance.
Unless they care about winning right now. And this is the thing. Edmonton had always been on that list. And for the first time, Edmonton's not on it. Well, why do you think that is? They got McDavid, they got Draisaitl, they went to the Cup championship last year, and people think they can win. And listen, the one thing that will change this, and mark my words, if the Winnipeg Jets can continue in the playoffs doing what they're doing right now and have a nice long run in the Stanley Cup playoffs, and dare we say, get to the conference finals, get to the Cup final, win the whole damn thing, we will be having a very different situation. Like, guess what? The weather's never changing here. The size of the city in the short term is not going to change. The ugly drive when you get into James A. Richardson Airport and drive into the city, nothing's changing there. But the number one thing that changed in Edmonton is the fact that players feel like it's a world-class team that has a chance to win. And listen, if you paid attention to the Jets so far this season, based on their body of work, I think you'd have to think that they are getting closer to being part of that true Cup contending group. And if that's the case, you'll have more guys that'll decide. And listen, guys in the past have waived their no trade. Paul Stastny did it in 27-18. Nate Schmidt did it. So it's not like it is unheard of. But I will say this. I think the NHL, and I'm sure a lot of people in Winnipeg would agree, the NHL would be a heck of a lot better if the no trade clauses just weren't part of contracts. Now, you look at these trades in the NBA. You have star players getting traded to like 4 teams within 3 days. It's a lot of fun to talk about. Probably not great for them and their families. But it is somewhat of an uneven playing field. And I think that just makes what the Jets have done this year that much more impressive. But on that topic of contracts, And this is from Elliot Friedman in 32 Thoughts. Obviously there's going to be a lot of players playing in the Four Nations. That'll be where the attention of fans is. The attention of NHL GMs like Kevin Cheveldayoff is going to be down to getting some work done, knowing that there is clarity on where the salary cap is going over the next 3 seasons. Elliot writes, Winnipeg, among others, will get down to contract business during the Four Nations break. During my brief trip to the Manitoba capital, the quote that struck me the most was from Dylan DeMello. This was where I wanted to be, he said about re-signing last summer. I love that management doubled down on what we have. Apparently, exit meetings last year were brutally honest about what went wrong against Colorado and what needed to happen to avoid a repeat. Players showed up in great condition. They started strong, and they haven't looked back. The most mystery surrounds Nikolai Ehlers, and his teammates didn't want to speak for him. As written above, we are in a new era, and it's hard to predict where all of this is going. What the Jets did say was that players want to win more than anything else, and thanks to Hellebuck, they believe they have that chance. And, just using that Edmonton comparison, Remis, players obviously feel like they've got a chance to win in Edmonton, and they've got a superstar player that can take them there in Connor McDavid. Connor Hellebuck is turning into the goaltending version of that guy. And again, we haven't seen it yet on a long playoff run in the last few years, but I really do think the stakes are really high for this season. I mean, obviously with everything they've worked and they've done so far to put themselves in a position to potentially go on a long run and do something special. But the stakes, what a long playoff run would do for the organization financially, I think the way they're looked at around the league, as opposed to another early exit. That's another reason why winning the West and getting the second wild card, I think will be so important to get off to an advantageous matchup and not drawing a team like Colorado, which could easily be, a team that wins a division as opposed to playing in a wild card, which is where they're at right now.
Yeah, I just want to rewind a second, just touch on you mentioned no trade clauses. Like, I know people in chat like to complain about them, but you can only get them when you're 27 or have 7 years in the league. So you can still trade for any player under 27. There's going to be a lot of players in the league under 27. And, for a league where you can't really select the team that you start with, it's nice for a player to, take some control of their career. And they've earned a no trade clause after 7 years. It's unfortunate that, 50% of the players in the athletic poll say Winnipeg would be on it, but I think that's just a reality they're dealing with. And yeah, for the Jets, I think the perception around the league of the success they're having this year is, okay, yeah, great, you're having another successful regular season, but let's see you get it done in the playoffs. Like anytime Hellebuck, has any accolades, people are pointing to his playoff record. Now, look, I'm not blaming their playoffs last year. I think the whole team was pretty awful in front of him. He wasn't given much of a chance, but you look at the goalie numbers and it doesn't show that. So for the Jets, yeah, this is absolutely huge to get first in the regular season, and they're in a great spot right now. Play the 8th seed, and you don't have to play Colorado or you don't have to play Dallas. You're probably going to play Calgary or Vancouver, although Calgary's looking pretty good with Wolf in net right now. But yeah, I think there's some motivation to say, hey, we're not the team that we were, and we need to have a big season. And as you said, financially too. I mean, off ice would be huge. Playoff success. We saw what it did to the city here in 2018. People are coming out. People are really fired up. I think it does bring everyone together, something everyone's going to be talking about. And oh yeah, in April, it'll actually be nice outside where you can, come home after work and it's not pitch blackout. You can go outside and spend a few hours. So I am looking forward to a deep playoff run. But first, we got to get to the Four Nations and the trade deadline. But I think there's certainly, a lot more optimism. And, Dylan, you mentioned a quote from DeMello. He was the guy who said we need to come back and be, however many % better. Seemed like they, took it to heart, as Elliot detailed. The exit meetings last year were brutally honest about what went wrong against Colorado and what needed to happen to avoid a repeat. So, as much as we've been, talking about how horrible it was, they know, and it seems like they've taken steps to make sure, hey, this isn't going to happen again. We're going to put ourselves in position to succeed, and they've certainly done their part. But we just have to wait for the playoffs to see, if they can continue to execute.
Yeah, right out of the gate, I think the acknowledgement of the shortcomings and just how far off of their game they were in that series of games 2 through 5, particularly against Colorado, I think was something you had to have. I mean, if you don't accept reality and face the facts of failures in the past, you can't learn from them and be better. And, I think having Arneal being part of that group, moving on from Bones, who we all love, but putting them in a situation where he can put his stamp on the team, but also having been around quality teams in the past that have made long runs in the playoffs with other great coaches that have, done wonderful things in this league before, and being able to have the knowledge of being involved in the shortcomings of the last couple of years where, they disappointed in the playoffs. And listen, it still will be the measuring stick. But right now, with what this team is doing consistently from game number 1 through game 55, it has made even, I think, the biggest detractors of the team, like Wake Me Up in the playoffs, kind of open up and say, all right, this is a hell of a hockey team right now. And if they continue doing what they're doing, we could be very busy here on WST through the month of April, through the month of May, and dare I say, maybe even June. We'll talk about it with Murat coming up, as well as his thoughts on contracts and the job at hand, even in the short term for the next couple of weeks, as we heard from Elliot Friedman on all of that. Now, I did mention tomorrow, WST Game of the Month. Jump on those tickets if you haven't already. WinnipegJets.com/WST. Got to thank our friends at Rolly's Transfer for their great support of Winnipeg Sports Talk. Folks, Rolly's, family owned and operated for over 60 years here in southern Manitoba and in Winnipeg, and the most trusted name in moving in Manitoba. If you and your family are on the move this year, get the white glove treatment from the trusted professionals at Rolly's for your next move. What you're going to want to do is head on over to their website at rollys.com. In the top right corner, you'll see the request an estimate feature. Make sure to pop in WST in the promo code for a special discount for WST listeners and viewers on moving services and moving supplies. And then let them know when you're moving, where you're moving, and what needs to be moved. And the friendly staff at Rolly's will turn it around quickly, get you a great quote, and get you locked in for the most trusted moving service in Manitoba from Rolly's. For your next move, make it Rolly's. The white glove treatment awaits. Find out more. Request an estimate today over at their website at rollys.com. While Remis is right, the days are getting longer. We got a little bit more sunlight. It's not necessarily warming things up too much. We still got a stretch of this Winnipeg winter. Manitoba Batteries there for you to help you get through it with the best prices on batteries for your car, your truck, or literally anything in the city. It's your opportunity to shop local, support local, and save money at the same time, as Manitoba Battery has the best prices in town, period, beating the pants off the big box stores, and the best service as well. I mean, if your car's out and it's not moving, don't worry about heading down to Manitoba Battery. Just pick up the phone or order online, and they'll deliver that battery to you for free with any purchase over $60 inside the perimeter of Winnipeg. Beat winter with the help of Manitoba Battery. 2 locations, free battery testing as well if you want to pop in and see them and check in on how your battery's doing. Logan Avenue, Dovercourt Drive. And you can order online 24/7, 365 at manitobabattery.com. A lot of individuals changing places in the Canadian Football League over these few weeks. They'll need some new garb for their new teams. But fellas, if you need to up your menswear game heading into the new year, get on down to F Apparel right now with the best in custom men's clothing, custom suits beginning at $400. Along with chinos, golf pants, custom shirts, both tucked and untucked styles, and the best selection of menswear accessories in town. And of course, I know many of you planning big days coming up this spring and summer with wedding season just around the corner. No better place to get ready for the big day than F Apparel, and they've got a special discount for the wedding party if the fellas are getting their suits at F Apparel. Pop down and see him in person, 190 Smith Street downtown. Find out more or make an appointment to come in for a fitting online at F, that's EPH Apparel.com. All right, there is so much going on in and around the Canadian Football League as we get ready for free agency next week. And a big game south of the border too this weekend. Let's welcome in our pal Justin Dunk from 3 Down Nation to chop it up. JD, how are you?
Doing well. What's up, Hustler?
Oh, man, just got back from a great week in Costa Rica. A lot of fun, and back just in time to get ready for the big game on the weekend. But for those of us that follow the 3 Down game, it's how would you describe this week of the tampering period, if you will? It seems like there's been a lot of movement and a lot of players finding new homes.
The Ed Hervey legal tampering period lived up true to the man it's been named after, with Hervey getting a bunch of deals agreed to in terms of the negotiating window. That was really the thing that kicked this all off. And for the people that don't know, I get that these deals can't be made official until Tuesday, February 11th. But for all intents and purposes now, free agency starts on the first Sunday in February. And I would argue that, behind the scenes, it starts even earlier than that. So people need to understand that these deals that have been agreed to, that we've been reporting the entire week at 3downnation.com, are, almost as good as done. There have been some cases in the last number of years since this negotiation window was installed where guys have decided to go in a different direction, but those are few and far between. And you have to live up to your word in this league. It's a small league. So this is why a lot of the deals that are happening now are going to just be merely finalized when the market opens officially on Tuesday.
Well, let's get to the big story yesterday and how it might affect all this stuff. The cap going up $400,000. This seemed to catch a lot of people off guard. First of all, how did they come to the decision, or why is the cap going up $400,000? And what was the reaction from team management and agents when this came out?
Depends who you talk to, because some people knew at different times. There were some people that knew going into the window before it even kicked off. And then there were some people that just found out, as the news was coming out. So reactions were wide ranging, but more to your question there, this happened because league revenues are up. And that is overall a majorly positive story for the Canadian Football League and its players in this case, because as you mentioned, the cap's going to go up just over $412,000 as to what it was going to be penciled in at for 2025, which was $5.65 million. So now it will be over $6 million, which is a 7.3% increase. But if you look at the 2024 salary cap, it's going to be up over $500,000, which is a 9.7% increase. Though I think the real story here, though, Hustler, is the fact that the league is behind on these revenue numbers. This is a 2-year catch-up. The initial baseline revenue number that this cap increase was supposed to be based off of was the 2022 season, but the Canadian Football League Players Association hasn't even audited, or had the chance to audit, I should say, the 2023 financials from the league's 9 teams. They actually filed a grievance to try to get those numbers. And then that obviously leads into 2024. They haven't had those numbers either. You got to get 2023 done before you can go to 2024. So I will give a little bit of credit to the CFL for being honest about this and having this catch up happen now. But in reality, the 2024 cap should have gone up, and the 2025 cap should have gone up because league revenues are up in both years. This is a catch-up. So I want to challenge the Canadian Football League to be more open with its players and actually adhere to the terms in the collective bargaining agreement. Otherwise, this would not have been such a surprise to everybody. And you mentioned it, agents and players wondering now, well, if we would have known about this earlier, we probably could have got some more money. But you can't necessarily go back and renege on those deals because it's such a small league and you want to keep the trust. So it puts some of the agents and players in difficult situations, though the Canadian Football League Players Association, led by President Solomon Elimimian, is trying to find a way where this cap lift can touch, if not all of the players, more of them than just the upper tier players like the quarterbacks and star players.
Why, this is a naive question. Like, why the hell is it taking so long? I mean, like, I know the Bombers, they put out their financials last year for the previous season. I mean, this doesn't seem like something that we should be finding out right now just about the 2022 season.
I totally agree. And that's why I said, I challenge the CFL teams to be more open, at least with the Canadian Football League Players Association. If you actually are going to live up to your words about treating them like partners, and Randy Ambrosie has said that numerous times, I've lost count, then you need to be open and actually adhere to the terms in the collective bargaining agreement. And I'll go one step further, Hustler. It's a majorly positive story, as I said, but this is not exactly, let's say, a cash flush league. There are some extremely wealthy owners, especially now with PKP in Montreal, Larry Thompson in Edmonton, and Amar Doman in BC that have provided stable ownership. But why do we consistently have to waste time and arguably more importantly dollars on lawyers and accountants to enforce the collective bargaining agreement that's already been agreed to? Like, wouldn't you be better off spending that money if you're the Canadian Football League in marketing, or having some of it flow down to the players, or giving some people in the front office some bumps, or perhaps people in the business office? Like, that to me is what I can't understand. You've collectively bargained over this. You've agreed to it. Now every single item in there, it seems like, has to go to arbitration or has to have a grievance filed from the Players Association for this to happen. Like, I just don't understand.
What is Ambrosie's role in all of this? And I guess while we're talking about that, where are we at with who's going to be filling his shoes?
That's a great question. No, to be honest, I have not heard any names linked to the new commissioner role quite yet. It has been really quiet. I do know that there were some meetings in Toronto in December involving the Board of Governors. There was obviously the league meetings in January in Charlotte, North Carolina, where everybody got together there. And I do get the sense that the Board of Governors and the presidents around the league and the owners want to be meticulous with this. And they really want someone in there who's going to drive revenue, who has business connections, who can take this league to the next level. Because the last couple of years have shown that revenue growth is possible. Like, this is a number that's floating around, Hustler, and I usually hesitate to say it, but based on the formula and the collective bargaining agreement, you talk to people and they'll tell you that you kind of work that back from the salary cap lift, that over the last couple of years, revenue's up, around 18 million. Now, some people in the CFL will tell you there's increased expenses there, but let's just take 2023 and 2024. So you half that 18 million to make it easy. If the CFL revenues are up 9 million in back-to-back years, that's great news. But Amar Doman specifically, when I was talking to him at Grey Cup, is bullish on the league's future and believe there are more levels that the league can go. So that's why I think it's going to be a meticulous process. Randy Ambrosie is still there, but with him outgoing, I don't think he has, what would be the nice way to say it, the same power that he would have if he was the real, true commissioner in the role.
Yeah, I mean, like, for me, I get it, and I think Randy has done a lot of positive things. I mean, different people have different opinions on kind of the Ambrosie era, but knowing that he's got one foot out the door, I mean, finding a leader with a vision to fulfill the optimism of some of the owners like Amar Doman, it's incumbent that this happens relatively soon. And we do have a big period of time right now in this offseason where you would think that that's the time when things sort of get done. And it has been very, very quiet. But overall, though, I mean, I have to say, just being a supporter and a fan of the league, to hear that the cap was going up right off the bat. I mean, we're so used to and we're so trained to these negative stories about teams losing money and all that. It does seem like coming out of the pandemic, the league overall is on the upswing, and there's a lot of teams that have really, improved their lot.
Definitely. And you look at right there where you are, Hustler, in Winnipeg, that franchise has become the model of success in the Canadian Football League. A lot of Rough Riders fans will get their hands up in the air, but they're not selling out every game at Mosaic Stadium. They certainly didn't last year. So the Winnipeg Blue Bombers right now are the gold standard in the Canadian Football League. And then you have owners like Pierre-Carl Pelado coming along, pushing the envelope there with what's possible in terms of revenue growth in Montreal. Amar Doman with not only what he's doing with his own franchise, the BC Lions, but what he did with Grey Cup. I was told a big chunk of the revenue lift in 2024 was from the Grey Cup in Vancouver that Amar Doman put on. And you think about it, like the way that it was set up, Hustler there down at the convention center on the waterfront, all of the activations. It was amazing. They had the zip lines. He got Prince Harry in there, had a really great halftime act in the Jonas Brothers. Like, it's hard to beat. And it's making people around the league think about, well, why was it so long since we had a Grey Cup in BC and Vancouver specifically? Because the weather's usually really good. And maybe it's something that needs to happen on a more regular basis because of the type of revenue that the league and the Lions were able to derive.
I'm sure you'd agree. I mean, having been there and been a part of last year's Grey Cup, I mean, it can't come back to Vancouver soon enough. And it had been a long time. And listen, it's so much of it has to come down to ownership. And Doman's a perfect example of a guy that, had the financial wherewithal to truly invest in his product. And listen, what they've done at a grassroots level is incredible. I mean, I kind of through talking with people in BC that week, I mean, every single high school and minor football program in the province got a BC Lions branded tent and some other things, and you saw them at every single game. And it was great for the programs, but it was also amazing marketing for the Lions themselves to continue to grow their brand and to bring more people in. So it's been good. Just before we get to players, while we're talking about kind of big picture CFL stuff, for so long we've been talking about a 10th team in Halifax. And I mean, at this point, while it is, we would love to see it happen. I mean, I think they sort of need to move on to plan B. Are you hearing anything? To me, I would love to hear one of the first things out of the new commissioner's mouth is that we're still committed to 10 teams. And we think that Quebec City should be that 10th team. I mean, with the success and the growth of football in Quebec over the last 2 decades, it's crazy to me that hasn't been more of a topic that we hear more about.
That's because Jacques Tanguay, who's heavily involved with the Laval University football program, which is run like a private business, for those who don't know, doesn't have any interest. Now, that's not to say that he couldn't be persuaded in the future, but my take on the expansion talk is let's just shelve it for now, have 9 really strong teams, and then entice an owner to want to be involved. That could be that 10th team. There's no doubt that it would help a lot of things. It would balance out the schedule. It will allow the schedule to be moved up, as Randy Ambrosi has talked about multiple times, and only have, probably 1 bye week in there. You wouldn't have to stagger it the way you do now because you have an uneven amount of teams. It would give you more inventory in terms of games, whether that's on TSN or after that television deal or the broadcast deal, I should say, is up following the 2026 season to sell and bargain with to TSN or whoever wants to come and bid for those rights. So I'm a big proponent right now, especially with the revenue growth and the salary cap going up. Let's just continue to build on this upward trend, have 9 really strong teams. And then maybe somebody like a Bruce Bowser out in Halifax goes, hey, yeah, I'd like to be a part of that. And maybe the new commissioner isn't going into Atlantic Canada and being like a bull in a china shop and saying we have to have a CFL specific stadium. We're open to starting this thing out with a multi-purpose facility, which the Halifax regional municipality would be open to. And former Halifax Mayor Mike Savage told me as much, that they would be open to a multi-use facility there, but the CFL just kept saying, no, it has to be CFL specific. So I still think there could have been a team there if the CFL went about it in the Atlantic Canadians way. That said, to your point, it does seem like Quebec City as a football market could do really well. Like the Laval Rouge et Or draw almost, if not more than 20,000 fans to games, especially when they play the University of Montreal there. It's a big time rivalry. So I think if you had that rivalry between Montreal and Quebec City in the Canadian Football League, that it would only add to that. And if you talk to Jacques Tanguay about this, you say, hey, like realistically, the Laval Rouge et Or have 4 home games in the regular season. They usually host a playoff game, if not 2. And then they've been in, let's say, the regular rotation to host the Vanier Cup. But like that's not a lot of home games, right? Like let's say in a season where Laval hosts the Vanier Cup and 2 playoff games, and even in the regular season, that's 7 games, and maybe you host a national semifinal depending on the rotation. So let's say 8. Like I still think that there could be room there in that market, and it would benefit both parties if you had Laval and a CFL team together.
100%. And let's not overlook the success of the juggernaut that the Laval program is. Like, it's a natural progression. I mean, so many of those players have, huge brands in that area. Graduating from the Laval Rouge et Or to the Quebec City CFL team, I think would be just a natural progression, and it would give them a huge leg up on just going into a new market and starting a team. So, and obviously that rivalry within Quebec, and Quebec is such a big market too, that maybe those of us in English Canada don't understand or know as well. It is turned on. We always think of the French and hockey and the Montreal Canadiens. It absolutely is. You could make an argument that it might be the strongest football market in Canada right now, to be perfectly honest, at a grassroots level. I'm not sure that there'd be much debate on that. So it is interesting. But bringing it back to the CFL right now, heading into free agency, just, we went over the increase in the cap. I knew you touched on this briefly, but we're thinking about a guy like Kenny Lawler, who went and signed the deal based on what a certain cap is. Do you foresee any of these handshake deals potentially going south, or some renegotiation, shall we say, or revisiting things with maybe other teams based on the new information that we got yesterday?
There's a possibility for all of the things you mentioned, and that's being talked about between the CFL Players Association and the Canadian Football League. Still, there was a memo that I obtained today that went out to all the players that talked about the cap lift and the fact that the CFLPA is still pushing for this to touch all of the players. So I think the thing that would make the most sense is to disperse this evenly, that everyone that's not a rookie coming into the Canadian Football League, whether you've signed a new deal or not, because let's remember, there's guys like, let's say, Zach Collaros, who's a great example, that's in the final year of his 3-year deal, that it's not like he can, renegotiate that and rip it up. He could, but he's probably not going to. So if you gave a percentage increase to each player on the roster, I think that would be fair. A player that is not a rookie, coming in to the Canadian Football League, that is a union member, is how the CFLPA would look at it. I think that's probably the fairest way to go. But they're talking about other ways of having this money potentially dispersed, like upping pay in training camp or playoff bonuses. Essentially, players take a pay cut to play the most meaningful games in the Canadian Football League season because the playoff bonuses haven't gone up in a long time. I don't know the exact year, but it's been a while. So that's some of the things that are being talked about here. And I think the PA wants to go about it in the fairest way, where all the members at least get a chance, or it touches them and impacts them a little bit.
Tell us about Ed Hervey making moves out at Edmonton. We always like to raise a banner for teams that are the off-season champions. Listen, the Elks have needed it big time, and they had a long way to go. They've been an afterthought really for the last few years. But how much healthier is this situation in Edmonton today, off the field, but on the field right now, based on how they project with what they've been able to do before free agency even begins?
It's much better. And my man, free agency's already begun. Okay. Like, these guys are going to sign the deals for the most part. There might be a couple that renege, but free agency is already on for the uninitiated. So in terms of what Ed Hervey has been able to do with the Edmonton Elks, I really like the majority of the moves for a couple reasons. He's got high-end, quality, proven starters, Americans, but more importantly, Canadians. You look at some of the guys that he was able to agree to terms with. Robbie Smith, coming off a Grey Cup championship with the Toronto Argonauts, a Canadian ratio-breaking defensive end who had 6 sacks in the regular season, a guy that's in his prime right now. You look at Tyrell Ford, who he takes away from the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, a guy that was second in the CFL with 7 interceptions last season, a ratio-breaking Canadian starter. Like, he's getting legit Canadian starters there in Edmonton to really change their ratio game. And then you look on the offensive side of the football, he goes out and takes David Beard away from the Hamilton Tiger Cats. He is unanimously viewed as the best center in the Canadian Football League. Oh, by the way, he's Canadian. I really like the signing, or the agreed to terms, what should I call it, deal at least, of Keon Julian Grant. I think if he can stay healthy, he can realize some of that elite upside that he has. On the back end, they get Royce Metier from the Toronto Argos, who has 2 Grey Cup rings in the last 3 years. He's got 3 Grey Cup rings total, going back to his time with the Calgary Stampeders. So you've got proven guys who have won and played at a high level as Canadians. And that's not even talking about Jake Ceresna, who some people believe is the best interior defensive lineman in the Canadian Football League. There's definitely an argument for that as an American. And we haven't even mentioned some of the names that kind of go under the radar, like Emmanuel Rugamba, who's an absolute physical beast out there on the field. I really like the signing of American defensive back Kobe Williams. I think he can make an impact. Jared Brinkman up front on the D-line beside Ceresna, is a really big guy who's an up-and-comer in the Canadian Football League. So a lot of these moves I really like for the Elks.
I guess the other end to that is the Bombers here. And the Bombers have usually been the team. They keep their guys. They played at a really high level. Obviously, they come up short in the big game the last few years, but they have dominated this Western Division. In your opinion, JD, how big of a hit have the Bombers taken with the likes of Tyrell Ford and Kenny Lawler finding greener pastures with more green?
The bigger hit to me, and I like that pun there, is Tyrell Ford. For sure, because he was a guy they drafted high, developed, turned into a ratio-breaking starter for them. But at some point, you can't pay everybody, whether or not they knew about the cap lift, going into the free agent negotiation window. And, Kenny Lawler, yes, people will tell you around the league, they believe is the number 1 game breaker in the Canadian Football League. There are some other guys in that argument. I think you could talk about Gino Lewis and some other receivers. But the sneaky signing that the Bombers made that sort of foreshadowed to me that Lawler wasn't going to be back was Dylan Mitchell, who in his first year in the Canadian Football League as a rookie played primarily at X, the boundary receiver spot where Lawler usually lines up. And they got him for, I think it was around $150,000. So you get a guy there who has had production, who could have played in the slot if Lawler was back, but he's not. So you can put Dylan Mitchell in there. And I think the receiving group still looks pretty good if Dalton Schoen comes back healthy. You have Nick Dembski, Dylan Mitchell. You got guys like Carrick Wheatfall there, Kevin Sklarcius, who had a really good rookie season for them. And you bring in some Americans to see if they can find the next Ontario Wilson. So that's why I think the major hit for the Bombers is losing Tyrell Ford, but they've also shown that they've been able to create Canadian depth on that team, draft and develop guys to get to that Ford kind of level.
The Bombers also signed Reggie White Jr. And then earlier today, Jarrett Stearns. And, I was doing the lock shop with Dustin Nielsen earlier, who of course, does so many games out in the West. He had thought that Stearns was a guy that, was just sort of the victim of a pretty stacked depth chart at receiver in Saskatchewan. But thoughts on him, and what can you tell us about Reggie White Jr.?
No, I totally agree with Dusty on Stearns to start. Like, this was a guy that whenever he got in the lineup had Trevor Harris's absolute trust, and I felt like is more athletic than he's given credit for, and he's made plays and caught the football. I think he's going to be really good with Zach Collaros, especially if he can earn his trust, which I think he will. And then Reggie White Jr. is a guy that, if he can stay healthy consistently, people believe have some real he has some real upside in the Canadian Football League. So, it's not Kenny Lawler, who's that finished high-end product, but some of these moves that the Bombers are making here at the receiver position do have some upside.
I had a really nice chat with Bobby Dice at the hockey game a couple days ago. Dice is, I said, hey, you guys got Geno Lewis. It was a nice little addition to it. But I just wanted to ask you about him and that situation in Ottawa in particular. I mean, they had that great start. They sort of faded and, were maybe not the team they were in the first 12 games in the second into the playoffs right now. But are they moving forward? And how much pressure is on that group to kind of take that next step? It's great you're a playoff team, but it's sort of been Montreal and Toronto the last few years waiting for another team to kind of truly go in and be part of the mix to potentially play in a Grey Cup.
I wouldn't necessarily call it pressure, but there's an expectation among head coach Bobby Dice and everybody there in Ottawa that this team is going to take that next step and legitimately compete for a home playoff game and the East Division title and potentially even getting the Grey Cup. You look at this offense that the Red Blacks are putting together with a young up-and-coming pivot in Drew Brown, who Winnipeg Blue Bombers fans know well. The offensive line, I think, is a really solid unit, if not among one of the best in the Canadian Football League. And the same could be said for the receiving group right now. Like you're talking about, you got Justin Hardy, Geno Lewis, who's a bona fide number one target. Both those guys, you could say it's like 1A and 1B. You got Nick Mardner, who's an up-and-coming Canadian, Braylon Addison, and then the most intriguing of them all is Khalil Pimpleton, who didn't go to the NFL like some people expected, goes back there, and the Red Blacks go out and had William Stanback at the running back position, who seems to have, let's say, at least a better temperament than Reichwald Armstead, which is where I really felt like this team fell off last year was when they decided to release him. And I can understand the reasons why, but having William Stanback and also last offseason, it was a surprise for the Red Blacks for Jackson Bennett to retire, who was an athletic Canadian running back that also played special teams for them. They filled that role in trading for Daniel Adeboboye from the Toronto Argonauts, who some people believe has starting upside as a running back. So there's more depth there at the running back position, which I think should help them out. I like some of the chances that they're taking in the secondary with the guys that they brought in on more bargain rate deals and paying upper echelon guys to come in there. Like Trey Roberson had an underrated year last year, I felt like, in Calgary. Robert Priester had an interception in the Grey Cup and is a guy that I think can continue to rise, especially because he knows William Fields and the defense he's going to bring to Ottawa, as he was the co-defensive coordinator in Toronto. So there's lots to like there in Ottawa, but ultimately you got to put it together.
Hey, Dunk, before we go, can't ignore what's happening south of the border this weekend. I'm sure the Bills Mafia is dealing with another close call to Mahomes and the Chiefs, but what do you make of this matchup right now that's pretty close to a pick? I'm a 1-point spread in the game between the Eagles getting another crack at the Chiefs on the verge of doing something no team has ever done, winning a three-peat, 3 straight Super Bowls.
It's a great Super Bowl matchup, man. Stars all over the field, as has been well documented. But until Patrick Mahomes loses one of these big-time games, I got to go with the Chiefs. I know the Philadelphia Eagles can be physical on defense, can run the football with Saquon Barkley. But what concerns me is the fact that passing attack with Jalen Hurts hasn't been consistent. And I think Steve Spagnuolo can take advantage of that. I would expect him to run blitz a lot, load up the box, force Jalen Hurts to beat him. I'm not saying he can't, because he showed it a couple of years ago when these teams played in the Super Bowl that Jalen Hurts almost won the game for the Eagles. But this season, it has been a struggle in the passing game. So I think that's where the game could be potentially won or lost. But Patrick Mahomes just seems to make plays at the most critical times and usually with his feet. For whatever reason, some of these teams, and the Bills did it, which I can't understand why, Sean McDermott being a defensive guy, just give him the edge and he picks up an easy but critical first down with his legs at a key point in the football game. Like, that's what I look for from Mahomes. If it doesn't happen, it probably bodes well for the Eagles.
Yeah, you know what, we spend so much time talking about, Andy Reid, of course, the head coaches, and, Sirianni, who's actually not coordinating either side of the ball, and Kellen Moore. This might be the greatest matchup of defensive coordinators in Super Bowl history, though, with Vic Fangio over on the Eagles side of things.
It's really good. I mean, I don't want to overstate it, because you can go back to like the New York Giants against the New England Patriots, where you had Bill Belichick against Steve Spagnuolo. So it's pretty good, but there have been some really good ones in Super Bowl history too.
Can't wait for a busy week with the Super Bowl, and then, of course, free agency next week. Fill people in on what is going to be a very busy week for you and the 3 Down staff over at 3 Down Nation.
You bet, man. Appreciate you allowing us to get the plug in here. We're just staying up to date with everything in CFL Free Agency, the negotiation window. So keep it locked to 3downnation.com for all the latest breaking news. We'll have it there for all the Canadian Football League fans across the country, and the ones that are around the world too.
Appreciate you, buddy. Have a great one and enjoy the Super Bowl.
You too, man. Thanks for having me on.
Take care. There's Justin Dunk, 3 Down Nation. That's where you're going to want to hit for all of your CFL news as it happens with free agency next week. All right, we are going to get back to the Jets and some NHL talk with Murat coming up in just a moment. I do want to give a big thanks to our friends at Princess Auto for their great support of Winnipeg Sports Talk. Fun talking Bombers and CFL. Won't be long before we're back at Princess Auto Stadium cheering on the blue and gold. But, of course, Princess Auto, synonymous with our city of Winnipeg. Founded in Winnipeg, headquartered in Winnipeg, and now coast to coast, but with 3 locations to serve you, featuring the best deals on the most unique assortment of tools and equipment around. Everything you need to complete the projects on your list or start something new is waiting for you at Princess Auto. Pop by and see them, Panet Road, Portage Avenue West, out in Brandon for our friends at Westman. And, of course, you can also shop online 24/7, 365 over at princessauto.com. Big cheers to our friends at Canadian Club as well. If you're looking for the best in Canadian whiskey, look no further than the original Canadian Club, brewed in Windsor. And since 1848, been the standard for Canadian whiskey. Now, when you pop by your local Manitoba liquor marts, you can get the original Canadian Club 100% rye, Canadian Club Classic, and don't forget on your next trip to your local beer store, Canadian Club and ginger ales waiting for you. Pre-mixed cocktails in cans. Great if you're on the run, going to an event, or just want a little change up from beer. Canadian Club, proud sponsor of Winnipeg Sports Talk. And as they say, keep that date circled, February 27th for our Whiskey Fest event. Just still waiting for a little clarity after all the craziness of the last week or so when it comes to whiskey, what's going to be available in Manitoba, what isn't. So we hope to have that clarified for you tomorrow, and a ticket link for you to jump on. Shout out to the guys in the Morden Whiskey Club. We're ready for you, fellas, and we'll get that to you ASAP. And, of course, our friends at Wallace & Wallace have done such a wonderful job for Winnipeggers and Manitobans, being the leaders in fencing and overhead doors. Also wonderful supporters of ours, and we greatly appreciate it. They have been doing it since 1946, and if you or your property needs the security and protection of a new fence, or if winter is doing a number on your current one right now, they've got you covered with vinyl, ornamental, welded wire, chain link, or wood fences. And if it's time to replace your garage door, give them a call. Wallace & Wallace has Winnipeg's largest selection of overhead garage doors, one to perfectly match your house and add value to it as well. Give Wallace & Wallace a call, 452-2700. A member of their team will arrange to come out and give you a free estimate. You can also visit them at wallacefences.com or pop down to their showroom on Lawson Crescent, just off of Kenniston. All right, let's get back to the Jets and the National Hockey League as we are on the verge of the Four Nations, but one more big game for the Jets against the New York Islanders tomorrow. Murat of The Athletic joins us now. Murat, what's going on? How are you? Oh, hold on a sec. We got you muted. Is that on us, Reem?
I think he's got to accept this permission change. We should be good now.
There we go.
Oh.
How are you, buddy? Great to have you
Wait.
back on the show.
Hold on one sec. Don't answer yet. Don't answer. Let me just do one thing. Okay, you're good now.
Perfect.
Hi.
What's up?
Feeling pretty good. Had a nice drive out to the rink in the wind and the sunshine actually at the time that we had out there. Practice was good. Jets were in good spirits. I had a really good conversation with the player for an upcoming story. So yeah, vibes are good around here.
Listen, the vibes couldn't be much better with what this hockey team is doing right now. I mean, you lose Adam Lowry, we're all worried, oh, geez, how this is going to really test the depth. No problem. They've rattled off 7 in a row, maybe the game of the year on Saturday, and then come back with Eric Comrie in the net and put up a shutout against one of the top teams in the NHL and the Carolina Hurricanes. There's been a bunch of stages of this season that have been somewhat eye-opening, Murat, and maybe we shouldn't be surprised with what this team has done up until this point, but pretty special run for a team that is showing no signs of wilting as we get closer to this midseason break for the Four Nations.
Yeah, and I do want to definitely talk about the lack of wilt, so to speak, in the Winnipeg Jets right now. But also, do you watch the post-game clips of the jacket celebrations?
Oh, yeah.
So Josh Morrissey presenting Eric Comrie with his jacket, being like, "Hey, we haven't given you a lot of run support. You said, who cares? I don't need run support." And you go out and get that shutout. I thought that was a pretty fun moment. You don't see Josh Morrissey drop swears a lot, but he was fired up, and obviously he was doing it to pump up his teammate, not to denigrate anybody. So that was kind of a fun one for me. As for just the overall scheme of things, this is the spot. This is the time. This is the part of the season where the Winnipeg Jets are supposed to fall apart. The story has been written. We saw it, a small version of it last season with underlying numbers, even if wins often came. We saw 2 years ago where late January was the beginning of a really pronounced swoon for the team. It's been seasons before that as well. When Paul Maurice stepped down, the Jets were in a playoff spot. They went on to lose that spot. Like, there are so many different times, and yet the Jets are on a 7-game winning streak. And the one game where it really looked like they'd come off their game, Scott Arniel meets with the team after it, meets with the media after it, and says, no, that wasn't good enough. These guys asked for higher standards, and we set higher standards for ourselves, so let's meet them. And then the players, instead of wilting in response to that, came back out with some really quality efforts, leading to 7 straight wins, including that Washington game. And let me tell you, I've talked to people in Washington. They are impressed with the quality of the Winnipeg Jets hockey team right now. So that Carolina game as well, they really, I think it would just be too sweet to flip the script on its head and head into this break here with an 8th straight game. That would be too sweet for Winnipeg. So I hope you all get to enjoy that.
Well, and listen, it is a pretty juicy matchup tomorrow, and that probably wouldn't have been saying that 3 weeks ago. But it seems like Patty Raw's message has gotten through to the New York Islanders, and they realized that they were on the verge of being sellers and having everyone leave the room. They've won 8 of their last 9 games, and they need every single point right now with the crazy battle for that final wild card spot. This is going to be another test against a team, like Carolina, that has been playing at a high level and has been doing their fair share of winning as of late. And you know that it's always a dangerous game regardless of the team when it's like the last day of school before you get out on holidays. Sometimes your head can be different. I'm sure the message from Scott Arniel will be, guys, let's focus on 60 more minutes of quality hockey like we've been doing, get the result we're looking for, and earn that 2-week break for the players that won't be representing their countries in Montreal and Boston.
Yeah, 100%. Last day of school for us was always movie day, right? It was like you could check out, and if they do that, it's not going to cut it against the Islanders, which is, like you said, that's kind of crazy to think of, right? Like a few weeks ago, I would have been talking about Brock Nelson as an ideal Winnipeg Jet, and this idea that he plays with such pace and has finishing ability and has a lot to like about potentially being a second-line center in Winnipeg. I think he can really make hay from that. And I think the first person that told me to pump the brakes on that wasn't specifically about Nelson, but it was John Shannon. We were talking maybe it was on OB. And he was saying, well, nobody's told Lou that they need to be sellers yet. Like, they believe in themselves over there. And I'm like, oh yeah, ha ha ha, good on you, Long Island. And now despite a whole bunch of injuries, they're, like you said, the same, I think, last 10, 8-2-0 as Winnipeg is. They're winning despite a whole bunch of injuries. A lot of people are scoring and stepping up, and their defensive game is great. Ilya Sorokin has been incredible. There are a lot of things to like out there. And if that lasts, you can forget about Brock Nelson. You can forget about the blue sky dreams. I don't think Barzal was ever on the table, but fans always ask me, hey, what about him? That would be a nice moonshot. If they stay in it, and tomorrow night's one could be a real authoritative way to say, hey, we're still in this because the Winnipeg Jets are the top team in the NHL. Those guys don't become available. You got to pivot somewhere else.
Well, and I guess, listen, I want to get to your latest on the contracts with the Winnipeg Jets and the player poll and all that. But I do wonder, with how well this team is playing right now, and I'm not suggesting they're just going to stand pat, but I do wonder if the way that some players have stepped up in the absence of guys like Adam Lowry, with the way that they played as consistently as they have all year, with the results that have followed it, I do wonder the fine line between being aggressive and trying to make your team as good as it possibly can, with the worry that the old, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, and changing too much to a team that has been so good so consistently all year.
I think there is some of that. Like, I'm going to sort of talk out of both sides, so to speak, about that. But one of the things I was struck by, speaking to Kevin Cheveldayoff, a couple weeks ago in Denver, was this idea, like, as analytical as they are and as hockey savvy as they are, I tend to think that emotions play a pretty big role in the memory of NHL executives and coaches. So certain times of their careers that were maybe emotionally more impactful, I think they learn lessons from that time almost disproportionately. And what do I mean by that? That's pretty vague. He was talking about the Winnipeg Jets 2018 playoff run and the Western Conference final trip. Okay, whatever, Vegas beat them. That was kind of a surprise. And then Washington goes out and wins the Stanley Cup. Well, he made a point of saying, Stas was an amazing fit. And the Washington Capitals at that particular trade deadline, they went out and they addressed depth only. And he was seeming to say, let's pump the brakes on absolutely needing a big name, big swing acquisition. If you have certain needs and they're a little bit more on the depth nature, and you have the chemistry higher up in the lineup, he seemed to be saying pump the brakes on needing that kind of swing. And I get that. There are times when you watch the Winnipeg Jets where it seems like they have everything that they could ever want. And that's nights when the Scheifele line is going. Recently, that second line is on fire. Cole Perfetti in particular, who isn't supposed to be able to get it done at this time of year, 8 points in his last 6 games. Nikolai Ehlers been consistently good, other than maybe a couple weeks right after his injury. Vladislav Nemesnikov is producing again. So now you can believe in that in a way that I think a lot of people were doubting about this time of year and crunch time. The Lowry line, when it's the Lowry line, has been so effective. The Niederreiter, Kupari, et cetera line, also incredibly effective. And then you look at Morrissey and Sandberg holding down the top 4 on their pairs. There are times when they have everything they could need. And I would almost understand thinking hey, there's something special here. Let's not mess with that. And then the complete flip side of that, and I won't spend as many words on it, is this is also a team that sent Brad Lambert and Parker Ford down for 24 hours this week to save a tiny bit of cap space just to make sure they're accruing the maximum amount, and expect that same move probably heading into the break coming up, because they want to maximize every last penny and dollar for potential acquisitions heading into that trade deadline. So yes, it's an incredibly difficult question for themselves for the Jets to ask themselves. And I think they're putting themselves in a position to max things out as best as they can.
Well, and one of the things that I know you've talked about it, but I think generally it may be a little underreported, is just the effects of that salary cap and the very nice position the Winnipeg Jets find themselves in heading into that March 7th trade deadline, considering where they've been in relation to the cap all year and the amount of space that they have been accruing if they did have the opportunity for a player that might come at a much higher ticket than maybe normal acquisitions are.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up. That's worth talking about. If you go strictly by projected cap space, Winnipeg is, I think they're 10th or 11th most in the league, but there are only 2 playoff teams ahead of them, and they're wild card teams, the last that I checked. Like, the combination of being a legitimate cup contender and having pure accruing day-by-day cap space is uniquely a Winnipeg thing. That is a strength for the Jets heading in to the trade deadline. There may be good players on inefficient contracts that they can afford that other teams can't. There might be lower acquisition prices as a result. If they can fit in a contract and they don't need to ask the other team to retain, well, maybe that first round pick becomes a second, or the second becomes a third in terms of the ask. That's a really good spot to be in. And it's not as though they're alone in having opportunity. There are teams that will have players on LTIR and thus have a cushion with which to work. But in terms of cap space that's building every single day, the Jets are in as good of a spot as it gets. You look at the number of points they have in the standings, combine that. You have to tip your hat. You have to tip your hat to the management that made decisions. And they made bets that might even burn them someday in the future. Gabriel Velarde will get a raise. Cole Perfetti's next contract will be more expensive when it's long-term. But right here and now, those shorter deals mean a whole bunch of space building up every single day under that cap, so that by deadline day, the Jets, will be probably in the best position in the National Hockey League in that way of thinking as well. And that deserves praise.
Yeah, just as long as they can get players that don't have Winnipeg on the no trade list, which I'm sure was a big topic yesterday as the thing came out. What does the Athletic have it out for us? We have to make that the first question. Let's do this thing and let's just plaster that right up there. Although, as I've been saying for the last couple of days, both here and in some other markets, that can change quickly with the championship caliber team. It's happened with Edmonton. They were always on that list. And, I think the Jets are sort of a long playoff run away from maybe reminding people that, it might be cold and it might not be the sexiest drive from the airport, but there's a lot of players on this team that'll tell you there's a lot of great things about playing in this city. And if you can have a legitimate chance to win a cup, that can change people's opinions very quickly.
Oh, very quickly. And I think that some of those having Winnipeg on no trade lists can be done by default sometimes. And then they actually get asked and they think about it and they're like, well, actually, Winnipeg's really good. That changes things, right? Paul Stastny would be probably the most famous example of that. Mm-hmm. He had Blake Wheeler, of course, recruiting him a little bit and all that. But the Jets were a wagon and he knew that. And that changed the calculus for him. That was a special time, right? So that happens. And it is funny, like, how it's like I have so many different angles and perspectives on this player poll. There are many questions on this player poll. What coach would you most like to play for outside of your market? Who would you least like to play for? That can be contentious. One of the questions was, should Gary Bettman retire? That can be contentious. They talked about best and worst facilities for visiting teams in terms of like the workout gear and dressing rooms and all that sort of stuff. And like markets like Toronto got absolutely roasted in terms of what they provide for opposing teams. There's a lot there, but because the no trade clause question gets asked, and it's also the first one in the presentation, and I saw some tweets about it, I think it's easy for a Winnipegger to go, this shit again? Oh, I don't like to swear on your show, Huss, but like, that's the feeling, isn't it?
For sure.
Like, and there's an angle from which I actually completely relate to that. Like, I can personally say, as a Winnipegger who writes in a league that's much broader than Winnipeg, that's trying to, I hope my stories get read in Winnipeg and outside of it. Like, there are personal moments that I'm stopping myself from completely unpacking here, that I have run up against the Winnipeg stigma, and I hate it because of the quality of this place and the people in it. And at the same time, it is on more no trade lists than anyone else in the league. And I think who's on your no trade clause is a valid question to ask. It's a unique thing to think about. I think we all want to know. And hey, has anything changed because Winnipeg's in contention for the President's Trophy? Apparently not yet. But to your point, a playoff run might do it as well. And then the other angle that I think of is when players come to the city. This hasn't been the case for literally everybody, but a lot of them stay, and a lot of them do buy into the community that grows on them. And one of the smartest things, like I haven't always loved Kevin Cheveldayoff's media, especially in groups and things like that. But one of the smartest things that I've seen him do is lean into Winnipeg's hold as a strength, which he did in an interview with Pierre Lebrun for The Athletic earlier this week. And he made a point, and I don't think this was by accident, to talk about the group of guys that goes ice fishing. And this is something I've talked about with Connor Hellebuck, with Alex Iafallo, with Dylan Sandberg, with all the guys that go. It's been in stories that I've written. There are people on the Winnipeg Jets who adore the fact that it's easy to detach from it all, head out to an ice fishing shack and just sit on the ice, fish, do their thing, and completely turn their brains off of hockey. And the best goaltender of his generation, perhaps, happens to be one of those.
The ringleader.
The ringleader. It's a Winnipeg strength, which you might not think of if there's some player out there that would rather play in Los Angeles or Florida or whatever. Okay, fine. Who needs them? Because it just so happens that the best is the ringleader in that way. So I think it's important that the Jets spend effort to celebrate those who want to be here. And I think they're leaning into it year by year a little bit more. There's a pivot happening here where I don't know if you got this. People always said, make them the Green Bay of the NHL, right? Like small market, such passion, lean into all those things that other people smack talk about. And I get a little points of Winnipeg pride when they do that, because this place isn't for everybody, and the people that it is for, well, we celebrate them.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think that in so many walks of life, the quality of whether it be an individual, a person, an organization, a team, is authenticity. And, to your point, Winnipeg isn't for everyone. And there's a lot of people that can't hack the cold. And, there are some people that, they're far more concerned with the bright lights or the attention that they'll get. I mean, whatever, that's fine. People are different. But I think for this organization and what they have done so well is acknowledged who they are, have been unapologetic about it, and then have worked through building the culture of the team and the organization that goes right up to the top, the way that the players are treated from the second that they get here, and try to say there's a lot of things that we aren't, but this is what we are. And it has resonated with a lot of the players that have decided to stay here, that have become the core of a team that is at the top of the NHL standings right now. And I would definitely argue, regardless of perception and no trade lists and all that, I would say right now, today, in February of 2025, moving into the trade deadline and, going into the playoffs. And obviously what happens in the playoffs is going to be a big, big factor, and there's no getting around that. But if this team continues to play the way that they have been and achieve success and do it with a group of players that have seemed to buy in the way they have to being in Winnipeg, I think the chances of having players that come and get a taste of it stay continues to increase. And it might even get to the point, if you truly are thought of as a legitimate Stanley Cup contender around the league, that come July 1, there's a number of players that might not have picked up the phone before that would be a little bit more interested in as to what Kevin Cheveldayoff and Larry Simmons have to say, potentially being Winnipeg Jets in the future. while we're talking about contracts, your latest bet piece up in the at the Athletic is on the skyrocketing salary cap. And, Elliot Friedman, I read this piece at the start of the show, has said that, Cheveldayoff has said that this period of time during the break is going to be a time to, hopefully get some stuff done when it comes to new contracts and negotiations with agents. What's your perspective on how the clarity about where this cap is going may affect Winnipeg's ability to keep players and, where their targets are right now in the short term, assuming that, what Elliot said is true and that there will be negotiations and discussions about getting some contract security and clarity on players that don't have deals for next year.
Yeah, and I mean, to what Elliot is saying, that would be a change for Cheveldayoff, because up until recently, Cheveldayoff was telling us, hey, I've been in touch with everybody, like the communication channels are open, but let's be careful. I don't want to characterize anything that we've done as outright negotiations. That hasn't necessarily happened. And if that does start to happen over this break, it'll sort of mark an acceleration of building next year and beyond's Winnipeg Jets team. And it'll also, I think, I would say that it would be well timed. Obviously, Cheveldayoff was not surprised by the increase in cap. I don't think anybody around the NHL has been surprised by that. But to have fixed numbers now, to have numbers that if they change will be only moderately so and have to be agreed by both parties, that I think helps grant some clarity in terms of what the contract numbers can be. And he'll also have the time, and Winnipeg has Josh Morrissey, Kyle Connor, and Connor Hellebuck at the Four Nations, and that's it, right? Like none of those guys need new contracts yet. And so that allows Cheveldayoff to focus on, perhaps the Ehlers of the world. I want to put Dylan Samberg's name front of line, Gabriel Velarde as well. And that's just a short list, and we get into all of that in that piece that you mentioned. I think Cheveldayoff got burnt a little bit, or at least some players. Brendan Dillon was pretty clear. He felt burnt by the fact that conversations were pretty superficial throughout most of the year. And ultimately, he did receive an offer from the Jets, but it was kind of a late thing. And so his mind was made, which has led to the Dylan Samberg opportunity. But I think that there's been some management on Cheveldayoff's part not to go too far down any one road, lest other people feel left out, which feels awkward to me. Just that feels like an awkward bit of personnel management in terms of these contracts too.
Well, let me just quickly talk to you about Ehlers, because he is the player that I think is obviously is an unrestricted free agent. He's been here for a long time. We certainly haven't heard any reports that he's banging down the Jets' door to sign a new deal. And he's an incredibly popular and incredibly important player on this hockey club right now. Do you think the increase in the salary cap changes anything for Nikolai Ehlers? And, as we'll probably ask you this a few more times later on this season, but, where we are right now with the team having so much success, do you feel differently about Ehlers' possibility of sticking around beyond this year a little bit more than maybe you would have early on this year?
My instinctive sense, and to be clear, I'm not a Nikolai Ehlers head about this, right? But just my instinctive sense is that his odds of staying don't change, because I can make the same arguments in both directions. Winnipeg will be in a better spot from which to sign Ehlers by virtue of the cap going up, and so will other teams, right? Like that when the cap has gone up in previous years, we all think, hey, the NHL GMs have learned their lesson and they're not going to overspend on July 1. And every time they have space, they overspend on July 1. So if there are teams that get more space as a result of this than they were anticipating, maybe the cost goes up, and that probably affects other teams in the same way that it does Winnipeg in terms of being able to give Nikolai Ehlers a contract. I don't think in Winnipeg he'd get more than the 8.5 that Hellebuck and Scheifele are making. I don't know if he would get that or more on the open market. I think his playoffs could probably go a long way towards cementing his reputation as having arrived. But the actual sense of whether he stays or goes, I think, continues to be a choice that he and Winnipeg get to make, because they should have cap space. They have ample cap space from which to sign him if they can come to a number they agree upon, and if he believes that he wants to stay, and if they believe that they want to make him a long-term priority. I've had my doubts on those fronts. He's been a player that's been loosely shopped in years past, or some negotiations around trading have happened for him. I don't think they view him as part of the core the same way they do Hellebuck, Scheifele, Connor, etc. He might be ready for something new. And then the last thought, like, this is a whole bunch of nothing. I don't know if he's staying or he's going, right? But the last thought that I have, and I keep circling back to, is I think that Nikolai Ehlers is a fairly sentimental person, and I think that he loves his teammates and adores that. And he might not be the first in line to sign up for a -40 day on the ice fishing shack, but I think that he really buys into this community and this city and this place. So if there is an opportunity for him here, and he isn't able to sort of like find a blue sky version somewhere else, I can't think of Winnipeg as a bad place for him to stay, based on everything, especially with the power play time, everything that's gone so well for him this year.
Fully agree on that. And I'll just to wrap this, I will say that I don't think there's anything that can be more helpful to the Jets in potentially keeping Nikolai Ehlers than to keep this train rolling the way it is right now and keep on winning hockey games and go and do some special things in the playoffs, because that's tough to leave. Even if there's money and warmer climates out there, at the end of the day, these guys are professional athletes. They're here trying to win a Stanley Cup. And if you feel that you have a legitimate chance to do that on a team that can do that with players that are going to be there, that you've been with building up to this point for a long time, it does make it closer to go. And we certainly haven't read in any publications that ship has sailed, but I will remind people that we heard that about some other players that are now on long-term deals with the Winnipeg Jets. So until it's done, I think anything is possible, and I know a lot of Jet fans will be crossing their fingers that we'll get more than just this season of number 27 in a Jet jersey. Folks, get on over to The Athletic for more. It's a long piece, very interesting, what the skyrocketing cap means for the Jets, Nikolai Ehlers, Neil Pionk, and more. And, of course, the player poll and much more is there on the NHL, and great coverage around the league as well. Murat, enjoy. You doing anything for the break? Are you going to be going to warmer climates like the other NHL players, or are you going to be sticking around here and gutting it out in the peg?
I mean, the tentative plan is to go to LA and see Haley, and that's probably what's going to happen.
Can't blame you.
Yeah, watching the news day by day on that one, but we'll see. So hopefully, I come back with a little bit of a tan. I hear you got a football game to watch as part of your break. I don't know what else you got. Yeah,
well, I'm actually going to be going to the Four Nations and doing the show from Boston in that second week. So that's going to be fun. I'll be Super Bowl on Sunday, and then next week we'll watch the games here from Montreal, and then the following weekend heading there on the Sunday. I guess the Monday is the holiday here, which is perfect because Canada would be playing when we were normally on the air anyways. It's the afternoon game, Canada-Finland, and then USA-Sweden on the Monday. And then we'll do the show Tuesday and Wednesday on the off days, Thursday before the final, then wrap it up on Friday and then get back. So, that is very much looking forward to going out with Dusty. We're going to do the lock shop out there, hook up with the Coolbet gang, and I think they've got us set up pretty good for the game. So considering it is a downtime for the Jets, I, like all hockey fans, have been so dying to get to best on best and see our Canadians play the Americans, and fingers crossed our three Jets will be playing in that final game. It should be a lot of fun. But in the meantime, stay warm, enjoy tomorrow's game, and have a great trip if you do get down to LA during the player break.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Us.
Good stuff. There's Murat Atesh. You know where to find him, theathletic.com. All right, we're going to get in to some NHL talk and some Super Bowl talk with my guy, Chris Meaney First off, though, a big cheers to our friends at Winnipeg's favorite local brewery, Little Brown Jug.
You train day in and day out, learning new techniques, approaching new concepts, and living out the thrill of achieving your goals. Building a craft beer is no different. While you spend your hours on the ice, we spend ours here, brewing our trademark beer. Again, and again. Here's to pushing the status quo and challenging ourselves to build something memorable. 1919 by Little Brown Jug.
Just mentioning the Four Nations coming up. If you missed yesterday on the program, the jerseys are in. For Canada, USA, the Sweden and Finland ones are phenomenal as well. And they're available now while supplies last at Royal Sports. There's the Canada one. I have to say, that Canada jersey is as nice as maybe any of the ones we've seen in a long time put forth by Hockey Canada. The USA, there's the Finland one. And we've got the Sweden one, the old Trey Kroner. But if you want to get them done, the boys at Royal can get them done up with your favorite player. I have a feeling there's going to be a run on Canada's with 44s on the back. I'll be getting one of those to take out to Boston as well. So all the Four Nations gear is in right now. Get it while it lasts at Royal Sports. While you're there, you can check out the Super Bowl gear that's coming in for both the Eagles and the Chiefs for the big game on Sunday. Of course, the biggest hockey section in town. And for those of you that may be waiting to add to the your Jet merch locker, that was a great time to do it with the biggest selection around. It's all at Royal Sports, the original sports superstore in town, 750 Pembina Highway, family owned for over 50 years. Check them out on Instagram as well for all the updated Four Nations merchandise, everything else that's dropping, sale information, and more. Follow them at Royal Sports Winnipeg. And hey, big game coming up on Sunday. If you haven't made plans yet for it, why don't you get your gang together at your local Boston Pizza? Big games, big prizes, big beers. The schooners will be pouring. World famous BP wings, gourmet pizzas, and the big game on all the big screens with big sound, as you have come to expect from the best sports bars around, Boston Pizza. Of course, Jets action tomorrow. They'll have all the Four Nations games on next week, but the focus this weekend is on the big game on Sunday. So if you do want to make a reservation, call your local BP, get that table booked, and get out there and have a good time cheering for the Chiefs or the Eagles in the big game. All right, we'll get to a little hockey, and we'll be definitely getting to the big game with our pal Chris Meaney, now with NHL.com, the fantasy guru, the king of props, and a card-carrying member of the Eagles Nation. I see we both wore our hats for our hit today, Meaney. How are you, pal?
What's going on, Hustler? Yeah, you know I had to rock the Philly green for you today. I knew you'd be wearing your red Chiefs cap there, and we're in for a rematch this weekend. Should be fun. You
got it. We'll finish off with the game, but wanted to hit you with some NHL topics. And listen, I mean, you dive into the National Hockey League as well as any, both from a team perspective, but also doing what you're doing at NHL.com every day, capping games, point, shot props, and whatnot. So maybe more than a lot of people in the national media that, to be honest, maybe don't pay enough attention to the Winnipeg Jets. I've got to ask you about your thoughts on this team right now through 55 games, first place overall, scoring the most goals, by far the best goal differential in the league, the best goalie in the league. I mean, there is so much to love about this Jets team right now, and 7 in a row getting into the final game tomorrow against an equally hot New York Islander team.
Yeah, the Islanders are cooking. They're not scoring like the Jets, but they're getting good goaltending like the Jets in Ilya Sorokin. I mean, there really isn't a hole. You just laid it out for Winnipeg in their season. I mean, started right off the hop, right? The streak that they had to start the season, getting ahead of most teams in the Western Conference. Connor Hellebuck is, every time you say, we've seen the best of him, he just takes it to another level, and that's exactly what he's done. I mean, last year, what did they have, a streak of 26, 27 games in a row with 3 or fewer, and they were just rattling off wins. It kind of reminds me of Price in his heyday, when the Canadians scored 2 goals, they won hockey games. And, I looked at Connor Hellebuck, I think 2 months ago, as a long shot for the Hart, and he was 60-1 at that moment. He is now plus 280 in spots for him to win the MVP. And if the season ended today, he would get my vote. Again, there's not a lot of holes in this team. Connor's played amazing offensively for years. I think his game has taken another level defensively. Scheifele's been great. Those guys have been back and forth trading, number 1 spots on the team in terms of goals scored. Velarde is healthy. Finally, we're seeing what his potential looks like. And even with Lowry out of the lineup, they're still scoring goals. They're defending really well. Perfetti looks like a nice young player as well. I guess my one question to you is, what does this team do at the deadline? Do they add, because they were aggressive last year, right? And Sean Monahan and Tyler Toffoli getting some experience. It didn't work out for them against the Avalanche, but you got to feel like they learned a lot from that series. Hellebuck, I know a lot of people will talk about his playoff performances, but as a goalie that you have to be confident with him heading into the playoffs. What does this team need? Probably some depth down the middle of the ice is something I think that they'll be looking to do come deadline.
Well, you know what? For sure, that's always been. I mean, we've been talking about that for the last couple of years, that second line center that they've gone. I mean, they Stasny one year, Kevin Hayes one year, which didn't work out as well. Last year, it was Monahan. And, it seems that they're willing to pay the price and they'll potentially make another move as well. What's interesting, though, Meaney, is the way that guys have stepped up in the absence of Adam Lowry, who is so important to this hockey club and basically plays second-line minutes as it is. He had just started skating on a line with Nikolai Ehlers that completely shut down the Avalanche. He still got scoring from Ehlers, and it kind of gave some more options. And then you look at the way David Gustafson's been playing in a regular role. Vlad Nemetsnikov, who continues to, I think, exceed anybody's expectations. And Rasmus Kupari, who's never going to have the finish of a top scorer, but adds so much when it comes to his speed, his penalty killing ability. Like, there's a lot of guys making cases right now that, hey, hold up, before you sell the farm from someone, we are capable of doing the job. Now, we know things escalate in the playoffs, and I don't think that they will be quiet. But there is, and I was just talking to this with Murat. I mean, there is an element of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, if you will. And, there's a lot of guys that have earned their opportunity to play right now, which does get a little, if anything, I think that need for a true, quote, top 6 center might have diminished a little bit. You might be looking at some sort of a middle 6 of a guy that could play as high as the second line, but could also play on a third or fourth line role, potentially move into the wing to give you a bit more depth. And then there's the blue line. And listen, probably 20 teams in the NHL would love a top 4 right shot defenseman that they could throw in. Those guys are at a premium. There's not many of them out there. If anything, I think the Jets will for sure add a blue liner or 2 to potentially move that third pairing down to a pseudo fourth pairing, if you will. But it's hard to look at the Jets right now and see many massive holes right now because of the way guys have stepped up in areas that were kind of thought of as positions of weakness and the way they played so far this year consistently since the drop of the puck.
Yeah, that's right. And they're such a dominant team at home, and the head start that they had. And you look at some of the teams that are in their division: Colorado trading Mikko Rantanen, Minnesota, dealing with the injury to Kirill Kaprizov. So you have to like where they're at in the driver's seat right now. I mean, they got the goaltending, right, which is number 1. You mentioned the defense as well. Josh Morrissey's been phenomenal for a couple of years. Neil Pionk is having a nice bounce back campaign. He's a fantasy stud, touches a lot of categories. So yeah, you're spot on. And I think a lot of teams that are contenders, what they're looking to do is add maybe like that shutdown center. And that's why I like the Jets so much, because they already have that, right? You can move Lowry, you mentioned, into the top 6, played with Ehlers before, logs a lot of minutes, can kill penalties for you, will have the role of the shutdown center in the playoffs. He did a great job, I thought, against Nathan McKinnon despite the loss last year. So there really isn't a lot of holes. I think maybe a month ago I would have thought hey, maybe Brock Nelson. You mentioned they're playing the Islanders. Brock Nelson's at the final year of his deal. You wonder now with the Barzal injury, he's on long-term IR. Does Lou be aggressive at the deadline, decide to keep him and guys like Kyle Palmieri? But there really aren't a lot of holes in this Jets team. You mentioned the kids are playing really good. So I think Jets fans should be excited and what they can bring to the table. And special teams is rolling as well.
The special teams, I mean, just quickly, I mean, if you want to talk about a difference when you last year and this year, I mean, the Jets, people sort of forget the Jets were 4th overall last year in NHL standings through the regular season. And obviously with the ugly playoff run, people forgot that very quickly, and for good reason. But that was a team that was 4th overall, and Rick Bowness came on the show in a conversation with me and said, it kills me that our power play was as weak as it was, because I truly believe if that was league average, we would have won the President's Trophy. Probably would have helped out in the playoffs quite a bit. But dude, the turnaround, I mean, right now, like, we're not talking about a small sample size. We're talking about 55 games of an 82-game season, and they're more than a percentage point better than the Oilers' all-time power play success of a couple of years ago at 32%. I mean, it hasn't abated, and now the second power play unit's getting into it even more. And listen, we know that the games are called a little differently come playoff time, but it's not like there's no penalties. And that Winnipeg Jet power play, I mean, we can look at what Connor Hellebuck's doing and their defensive structure and their ability to limit chances, all of that you need to do to be a good team. But I mean, to be honest, the ace in the hole for Winnipeg right now is that power play that if it continues at this rate through the regular season and into the postseason, is going to be a huge mountain to overcome for any team that they'd be going up against in a best of 7.
Absolutely. 33.8%. The next closest team is Vegas at 28.5%. And then you have the Red Wings at 27%, which is a team that struggled to score 5-5. Their structure's a little bit different since Todd McClellan has taken over roughly the end of December. They've been the best team in the NHL, but that's a team in the Jets that can bring it 5-5. Then you have that potent power play, and then you have Hellebuck between the pipes. So, you're checking a lot of boxes in terms of what you want to see from a team in the Stanley Cup playoffs. And I'll go back to Velarde. Like, this is a player I really liked in LA. He was a part, of course, the PLD trade. And last year we saw it. Unfortunately, injuries crept into his game and he wasn't able to stay healthy. But, having him healthy on the power play in front of the net, he's got a heck of a release. He's a big body. We know that Scheifele, Morrissey, and Connor can bring it, but just having him on that power play, I think, has helped a lot. So, again, there's a lot to like about the Winnipeg Jets at the moment.
Explain to me the Jets being the 10th favorite to win
Makes
the Cup
no sense.
at
Capitals either.
15-1.
Neither of those teams are getting any love. I don't fully understand. I mean, the trade, Mikko Rantanen to Carolina, they moved to Cup favorites at plus 600, plus 650. It's not a number that I really like, although it's an addition that Carolina certainly needed, and he hasn't gotten off to a great start in Carolina at the moment. We'll see, how the next couple months lay out for him. But I was going to say that to you. There's value with the Winnipeg Jets, in the betting market. And just like the Washington Capitals, they're right there with Winnipeg. They're getting strong goaltending from Logan Thompson. Ovechkin is having arguably his best goal-scoring season of his career in terms of shooting percentage, and he's just a handful away now of passing Wayne Gretzky, 17. But they're not getting a lot of love in the betting market either. So I think I'm not really sure, Hustler, why that is. I would imagine it has something to do with how the playoff run went last year against Colorado, but I would like them in a series against the Avs. Should that happen, if it started today, what would they get? The Flames? I would like them in a series against the Calgary Flames. So just, keep it rolling. If you're a Winnipeg fan, you want to see them continue to finish strong, get home ice, open up home ice, let everything in the Western Conference come through Winnipeg.
Well, I mean, the Jets have a 7-point cushion in the West right now. For first place, which is very significant. I guess the Oilers have one game in hand, but I mean, still to make up 5 points in the 3-point era is a lot. And, the ability to play Calgary or Vancouver in the first round, assuming that it's one of those teams in the 1-8, I think it would be exactly what this team needs to kind of get over that hump and feel good about themselves going into that second round against whoever else that they played. But you're like, I kind of spent some time yesterday on this when we were doing our Coolbet lines, and just at the start, I mean, if you've now sort of come around, there's a lot of people that, hey, well, we're going to wait and see what happens. And listen, I get it. There's an element of talk to me in the playoffs, but I'm sorry, those lines aren't going to be available in the playoffs. And I think they're probably, I would be shocked if by the time that the puck drops on the 22nd and the resumption of the NHL schedule, that we haven't seen some significant changes. And I think the Jets are going to be far more in the mix with those top teams. So I think now's the time to jump on it if you did want to get it before you're looking at an 8-1 as opposed to a 15-1 based on where we're at right now. You know, as far as the playoffs go, you know, in the West, I mean, you look at Winnipeg, you look at Dallas. I mean, Minnesota, it's amazing that they are still where they are with the injuries that they've dealt with this year, in particular Kaprizov. But I mean, they're still hanging on there just above, but I mean, they're 7 points ahead of Calgary and Vancouver. So I think we can assume that they'll be a playoff team. Colorado will be there. I don't think there's any doubt that they've got another gear to get to. And then you've got Edmonton, Vegas, and the LA Kings. In the West, it sort of looks like a 2-horse race right now for that 8th spot between the two Canadian teams, Calgary and Vancouver, which is basically the exact opposite of what we're dealing in the East right now.
Yeah.
With a group of really about half a dozen teams that I think right now are going into the break or coming out of it, heading into the trade deadline, feeling that they have got a very good chance, if they play well and win some hockey games, to be a playoff team.
Yeah, absolutely. The Eastern Conference race is going to be phenomenal. I mean, if you want to include Ottawa as that third team in the Atlantic, are the Lightning going to miss the playoffs? I mean, that's a team that I don't think will miss the playoffs. So they've really struggled. Their 5-5 game hasn't been great over the last month, but I like their chances. And the Rangers getting JT Miller, I know they have a lot of teams to pass, but I love that addition for New York. And that really just leaves one spot. You know, looking at Boston, looking at Detroit, as I mentioned, is the best team in the league over the past couple of months. The Islanders are winning a lot of hockey games in a row. I think we can count the Canadians out. The Caden Gooley injury is significant, and they've kind of fizzled out here. But they're still kind of in the hunt as well. So there's a lot of teams that are fighting for that spot, and I think it's going to come down to, you know, who's going to be buyers and who's going to be sellers. Are the Red Wings going to be aggressive, because they have been over the past couple of years, bringing in some veteran players like Vladimir Tarasenko and Patrick Kane? So are they going to be aggressive at the deadline? Again, the Islanders with Matthew Barzal on long-term IR, that frees up roughly $9 million for them to be aggressive at the deadline as well. They have the goaltending in Sorokin. The Boston Bruins are a team that I have some concerns with. You know, their 5-5 play is not great. They've given up a lot of rubber, among the leaders in shot attempts and shots allowed over the last couple of months. And David Pastrnak has been amazing. I think he's got roughly 30 points over like a 12-game point streak. He's been phenomenal. He's doing what he can, but they're not getting secondary scoring. In the West, I don't want to count the Canucks out, but it doesn't look great, right? You trade JT Miller. There's still some issues, I think. You know, it potentially on the ice, Elias Pettersson's not having a great season. Quinn Hughes is dealing with an injury. So I don't really like their outlook at the moment. The Flames are getting good goaltending from rookie Dustin Wolf. So I like their spot. And a team to keep an eye on is Utah. You know, Dylan Guenther returned the other night. He played a career high. He had 3 points, he had 2 goals, an overtime winner. If Logan Cooley can get back into the lineup with Clayton Keller, they got Sergachev, they got Sean Jersey, who you're familiar with, of course. He's close to coming back into the lineup, and the goaltending is decent there. So I think they're a team that could potentially get in, but I still wouldn't give them the benefit of the doubt against the Oilers or the Jets. I think the Jets' biggest team to keep an eye on would be the Dallas Stars. I really like the Stars. I think that they can come at you in waves. The addition of Mikael Granlund, they got 3 lines. They're very deep down the middle of the ice. They have room with Miro Heiskanen on long-term IR to make a move. They made the move with Granlund, with Seigan on long-term IR. They've been to the Western Conference Finals back-to-back years, kind of knocking on the door. So they're a team that I think is pretty complete, but this thing is wide open.
Well, and listen, I mean, should Winnipeg win that division and beat a Calgary or a Vancouver in the first round, I think it's highly likely that you're talking about a face-off with the Dallas Stars in round number 2 to come out of the division.
Yep.
And, listen, and this is the reason why. I mean, you see these numbers for all of these teams that are relatively close. it's so difficult to win. It's difficult to put 4 rounds together. There's a lot of variables that go in with injuries and whatnot. And at the end of the day, there is a level of parity in this league. There's a lot of really good hockey teams. And, you can make an argument for a number of different teams making it, but certainly the Jets have earned their spot in that conversation. Just one other quick thing on you mentioned the East. I'm not sure there could be a better story in hockey this year than if the Columbus Blue Jackets were able to make the playoffs. And they are right there in the mix right now. And I pulled up DFO today. And, there's a question as to whether Zach Werenski plays tonight. And he's had an all-world season, should absolutely be in the mix for the Norris Trophy. But you look at their injuries right now, Meaney. Goodbranson, IR. Boone Jenner, IR. Chinnikov, IR. Monahan, IR. Marchenko now on the IR. And then Fabre and Werenski day-to-day. I mean, I think we can lock in Dean Evison for a finalist for the Jack Adams Trophy, but they somehow are finding ways to get through this. They've got a great home record. I mean, like tonight, they're plus 130 dogs. And I mean, when you look at the roster, you sort of get it. But man, they've exceeded everyone's expectations. And wouldn't it be cool if they could, somehow hang around and get into one of those spots, considering everything that happened heading into the season?
Yeah, I know. And an absolutely amazing story. And they're so fun to watch. I mean, if you like goals, you watch this team and, you're amazed. And, they're starting to get a little bit better goaltending from Elvis between the pipes. But offensively, they've been great all year long. You're getting the breakout campaign from Kirill Marchenko. You mentioned, unfortunately, breaks his jaw on the bench and, sidelined here for 6 to 8 weeks. He was having an unbelievable season. And that I'm following Edge Stats over at NHL.com/fantasy. He was checking so many boxes in terms of speeds and high danger shots. And
I think he's plus 31 too.
Yeah.
When was the last time a Columbus Blue Jacket was at the top of that list?
Yeah,
probably never.
Probably not. It's been a minute for sure. And, he was flirting with some records that franchise records that Panarin had when he was there a few years ago. But yeah, that top line with Monahan and Marchenko and Voronkov. Voronkov's one of the best kept secrets, I think, in the NHL as well. Then Monahan goes down, and then Adam Fantilli jumps up on the top line. He's another guy that checks a lot of boxes. He's over in our picks for a point and 3 shots tonight over at NHL.com/fantasy. High danger chances and shot speed and average skating speed. He's a nice young player that the Blue Jackets took early. There's good signs like getting their captain Boone Jenner back soon. I think after 4 Nations, right? That's going to be a big boost to the team. Chinnikov was great before he went down. He's been skating with the team. It does sound like Zach Werenski avoided a significant injury. That's good news as well. I don't know if they'll be aggressive at the deadline. They have a ton of cap space. They probably shouldn't be because of where they're at in the rebuild, but hey, I mean, why not, right? If they can get a player or two to help this squad make the playoffs, that's probably something that the organization will take a look at. So yeah, between them, the Bruins, the Blue Jackets, the Islanders, the Rangers, the Canadiens, the Red Wings, the Lightning, and the Sens, only 2 or 3 of those teams can make the playoffs. And I really do feel like the Blue Jackets offensively, man, they can bring it with the best teams in the league.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure the people at Rogers are fired up right now. I mean, we could very well have 5 Canadian teams in the playoffs. I think it's almost a likelihood right now. If you give a spot to Ottawa, the Leafs, Winnipeg, Edmonton, and then one of Calgary or Vancouver, it is going to be great. But listen, we cannot have a conversation this week without discussing Sunday. How are you feeling about the Eagles going up against the final boss, Patrick Mahomes, and the Chiefs are on the verge of an unprecedented three-peat? Amazing matchup. We saw these teams go at it in a real thriller 2 years ago. It's close to a pick 'em right now. I mean, a slight favorite for the Chiefs on the money line. I know a lot of people kind of were hoping maybe the Bills would be in there, the Commanders, but I mean, the chase for greatness, the Chiefs are on. The Eagles with the level they've played for a number of years. I mean, it's a pretty awesome matchup. But how are you feeling from the Philly side of things going into this weekend?
Yeah, it is an awesome matchup. And, I feel a little bit better about Philadelphia pulling off this win than I did a couple years ago. Last time when they played, the offense was good. Jalen Hurts had a great game. They were able to move the ball consistently, and the defense didn't play all that good, especially in the second half. And, their defense was a little bit older, and I think their numbers were great. If you remember, everyone was talking about nearly the most sacks ever all time and all the pressure that they can dial up, and they never put Mahomes on the ground once. Now, when you look at this team defensively, they're a lot younger. Led by the Bulldogs, right? Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, Jordan Davis. You have the two rookie corners in Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. This is, I think, the most talented team in football, and they're well-deserving to be there. I mean, you just look at Zach Bond, who may win Defensive Player of the Year, Saquon Barkley, who may win Offensive Player of the Year, Quinyon Mitchell, Defensive Rookie of the Year. You look at the All-Pro first-team offense, it's essentially the offensive line, first or second team, and same sort of deal with the defensive line. So this is a very talented squad, but at the end of the day, the best quarterback is playing for the Kansas City Chiefs. The best head coach is coaching the Kansas City Chiefs, and you have Spags there as the defensive coordinator. But the Philadelphia Eagles can bring it all over the field, and Saquon Barkley may be the difference this time around, because if you remember that game against the Chiefs, they didn't really do anything on the ground against Kansas City. Miles Sanders put the ball on the ground early, and they didn't run the football, which is something that they like to do, and they do very well. So I think that could be the difference this time around. And Spags is not going to let Saquon, do what he's been doing. But it's a big boost, I think, having Saquon behind that offensive line, and a really good fit, because you could see the last couple of years, Miles Sanders and DeAndre Swift had really good campaigns, 1,000 yards each behind that offensive line. And now you're seeing Saquon, who's 30 yards away from the most rushing yards all time, in a season, including playoffs. So feeling as good as you can against Patty Mahomes and company.
You mentioned Spags. I'm not sure we're talking about Vic Fangio enough. I mean, it is a truly incredible matchup of defensive coordinators, as much as we focus in on the head coaches. And part of the reason, listen, I'm on the under Barkley. The Barkley number is huge. I mean, it's 111 and a half. I will be on that. And I mean, if you look at history in these big games against big running teams like the Ravens, the Chiefs have done a very good job of focusing on that and forcing the quarterback to beat you, and I'm sure that they'll try to do that. But just from a prop perspective, part of the reason, I'm on the under for Barkley for the 111 rushing, I'll be all over his receiving total at 12.5. I mean, I think that's such a small number. He could get that literally in one play. And to be honest, on the other side of things, I was noticing Kareem Hunt's receiving total is just 6.5. I would be surprised if he didn't get one or two out of the backfield to get over that number as well. Just thoughts on, is there a prop or two that you've been looking at that sort of stands out from either perspective of the teams? Because there'll be a lot of people that frankly don't like the Chiefs or the Eagles, but like winning bets on Super Bowl Sunday.
Yeah, this is a Super Bowl I don't think anybody really signed up for. You mentioned Buffalo early. I think a lot of people wanted Buffalo, and maybe Detroit or Washington was a fun story. But I'm on your wavelength when it comes to the running back. Saquon at 12.5 receiving yards, and Kenneth Gainwell, who's been their third down back, their 2-minute drill back, questionable to play in this game due to a concussion. So maybe that means that Saquon will actually get those reps, if you can believe it. He doesn't get on the field a lot in third down situations or in 2-minute drill situations. So, you got to like that number at 12.5. And I have noticed lately the Chiefs have given up some big runs on the ground. I mean, Cook had 85, 6.5 yards per pop. Mixon had 4.9, 88 yards in the playoff game. And, they've allowed the 6th most rushing yards and tied for the 6th most in yards per carry. But I think the way to go would be with the receiving yards. And you mentioned Kareem Hunt. What about Samaje Perine? Because for Vic Fangio, the way that he has his scheme defensively is the Eagles don't give up a lot of explosive plays. They sit back too high. They rely on those corners, and they give up some short yardage stuff. And that's kind of what the Chiefs do, right? They have some explosive players, of course, and Worthy is definitely trending up, and the Eagles struggle against tight ends. So Kelsey's in for a big game as well. But you look at Samaje Perine and last week against the Bills, or a couple weeks ago with the game on the line, third down situation, they could have easily ran the football, kicked it back, and, played defense, but they drew up a play for Samaje Perine. And Pacheco is clearly not himself at the moment. So I look at Perine's number at 6.5 receiving yards, right? If the Eagles do push the pace and get up like they did in the last time these two teams played, and the Chiefs have to play from behind, and they've done a good job playing from behind in all these Super Bowl wins lately. I think Pirine could be a factor as well. But I'm looking at Devontae Smith, 49.5 receiving yards in the 3 games against the Chiefs, 99, 122. He had 100 yards in the Super Bowl against them a couple years ago. A lot of attention. McDuffie, of course, will be on A.J. Brown. And then Worthy. Worthy is a guy that's trending up. I really like where his game's at, Hustler. At the start of the season, it was just 1 or 2 targets. Now they get him involved. Red zone packages. He actually leads the team in red zone targets over the past few weeks. I would look at his rush and receiving at 62.5 rather than his receiving at 59.5, because more than anybody that they like to get this guy involved and get the ball in his hand. So he could get a couple carries and a couple end arounds.
It's so funny. I mean, I was looking at the receivers that they had 2 years ago when they played and beat the Eagles. I mean,
Sky Moore, Kadarius Toney.
Yeah, Kadarius Toney, Sky Moore, and MVS are out, and they've added Worthy, Hollywood Brown, and DeAndre Hopkins, which has been a total non-factor in these last few games. His receiving total is only 11.5. So, with the amount and the way Mahomes spreads the ball out, I think those short numbers, maybe some really good bets on some guys where you're not needing them to go for 8 catches or 7 catches just to get there. So it should be awesome. I would say our buddy Gates is in the chat right now dropping Go Birds. And
of course he is.
Of course he is, trying to get me to go into the belly of the beast for the game. Not sure whether that'll happen, but it should be great. I know you'll be tuned in and locked to the Super Bowl, but fill people in on your new home at NHL.com, the podcast, the daily content for people that like to play a little DraftKings DFS or get into some props.
Yeah, absolutely, Hustler. Always appreciate the time here, and really looking forward to that Super Bowl on Sunday. And if the Chiefs do find a way to pull it off, of course, it will be history. I already made history going back to the Super Bowl 3 times in a row. Nobody's ever done that. So, yeah, you can catch all my work over at NHL.com/fantasy, writing about picks and fantasy hockey pickups and daily props every single day over there. We have a handful of picks and props for tonight, line combos to target if you are into daily fantasy sports. And we have the NHL Fantasy on Ice podcast, which is available wherever you listen to your podcasts on Mondays and Thursdays. And we got a lot of Four Nations coverage over at NHL.com/fantasy as well. Some Four Nation rankings. We'll have some props. We'll have a preview show on the podcast, diving into some futures throughout the tournament as well. So a lot going on, despite the NHL going on a little bit of a break here in a couple of days. So I do appreciate you taking the time, and go Birds.
Hey, may the best team win. You know who I'm back, and Meaney, all the best, and I can't wait for that Four Nations content next week. I'm really excited about the tourney. You have a great one, and enjoy the weekend with the exception of 3 hours on Sunday.
Take care, brother. Have a good one.
Later, buddy. Give him a follow on X at Chris Meaney, and NHL Fantasy Edge is where you're going to find all of his content. All right, let's get to a why not question of the day for not Autocorp, but Waverly and McGillivray. Remo's got it up in the chat right now. Who, in your mind, is the Jets' biggest threat in the Western Conference? Jets looking very good to potentially take down the number 1 seed and play the second wild card in the first round. But big picture throughout the playoffs, who's the Jets' biggest threat in the West? You can get that in and hit that poll. We will get to the Coolbet lines in just a minute, but while we're talking about that, there's been lots going on the chat. Let's get to fan feedback for our friends at Fans First, your number 1 spot for buying and selling Winnipeg tickets on the resale market with no added fees. When you go to fansfirst.ca and you check on a game and you're looking at tickets, that price, what you see, that is what you're going to pay. No more, no added fees. And from a seller's perspective, if you're a season ticket holder and you can't make a game, best customer service, best place to sell seats. That is certainly where I go to on the odd occasion where I can't use my tickets, fansfirst.ca. All right, the feedback is in. And it's interesting, Remis. It's still the Vegas Golden Knights in the eyes of the fans. And Vegas they've won 3 of their last 13 games. I think we all agree that that team will be ready to go. They've got the playoff pedigree. But I will admit, I'm a little surprised that it's Vegas at 52%, Edmonton at 27%, and only 15% for the Dallas Stars. And Colorado, who handled the Jets in the fashion that they did last year, only getting 6% of the vote.
Yeah, Dallas has the Heiskanen injury. I think that's going to affect them. They still got a great deep team, and we haven't really seen them in a while against the Jets. Colorado, the Jets have handled them this season. They traded away Rantanen, and Middlestad, who they acquired last year, has not worked out. Edmonton, the Jets beat in the playoffs, so I can see why people, Kellebuck stone them all, and they some concerns there. And then Vegas, the Jets can't seem to beat Vegas, so I kind of get that, regardless of what their record has been.
Yeah, old habits die hard. We remember the Vegas Golden Knights. The dream, though, for me is a Winnipeg-Edmonton conference final. All Canadian matchup, guaranteed a Canadian team, preferably the Winnipeg Jets in the finals would be a great spot. So, but it's still Vegas, 50% as the Jets' biggest threat in the West. That is your fan feedback today, brought to you by Fans First, by fans, for fans, no fees. Check out the site today at fansfirst.ca. All right, before we go, let's head over to the Coolbet lines. We've got a relatively busy day in the National Hockey League. Not quite the massive slate that we had Tuesday, but still pretty close. We talked about all those injuries that the Blue Jackets are trying to get through right now. Zach Werenski, a game-time decision, day-to-day right now. And that's why they're a plus 130 home underdog, despite having a great home record against the Utah HC. Utah's minus 154. Vegas is looking to salvage something from this road trip out east. They're in Jersey to take on the Devils. I believe Nico Dawes in net tonight for Jersey. Jersey minus 102. Vegas minus 115. The Caps on top of the East, they're minus 159 favorites in Philly. The Lightning minus 159 favorites at home to the Sens. Second straight game between those two teams. The Lightning won the first one. The Wild, without Kaprizov, having been shut out in their last two games, are back at home, taking on Carolina, who was just here in Winnipeg. Carolina minus 189 favorites. Florida minus 169 faves in St. Louis. Colorado minus 159, common number we're seeing today. In Calgary tonight, the Leafs are minus 154 faves in Seattle against the Kraken. And another big road favorite, Vancouver, minus 196 in San Jose against the Sharks. And as I mentioned, you click on the futures, NHL season bets, you can still get the Jets at 15-1 to win the Stanley Cup. They're 6-1 to win the Western Conference. We did put together a combo card in the Lock Shop today. The Lock Shop Partner Parlay. We're taking the Hurricanes over the Wild in regulation to get a better number, and we're adding Colorado over Calgary and the Leafs over Seattle. That one's boosted from plus 414 to plus 475 in the combo cards right now. And then all of the usual nightly offerings, the lamplighters, the points from the point. And this is a kind of a funny one that Jake cooked up. How sweet it is. Willie Nylander to score and Elias Paterson, 1998. That's how we need to declare him now. That there's two of them. EP40, if you will, to get a point tonight. That's boosted up to plus 300. But fun night watching some hockey tonight, Reem. But tomorrow we're back at it. Winnipeg Sports Talk, game of the month, section 316. Jets looking for 8 in a row against a very hot Islander team. Going to be a great way to finish up the week and head into the Super Bowl weekend.
Head into Super Bowl weekend, the break for the Four Nations. So you'd like to see the Jets make it 8 with an 8-game win streak. So looking forward to seeing the Islanders come in here, and they're on a bit of a heater as well. And could we see history? Mark Scheifele becoming the all-time goal-scoring leader for the Jets Thrashers franchise. Do you think they'll pause the game tomorrow? And if he scores, do a little lap around the ice?
I don't know about that. I don't think there's going to be a pause of the game. There'll certainly be an acknowledgement, and I think everyone in that building will get on their feet to celebrate the accomplishment. But I love what Scheif had to say. He's focused on catching Dale right now, which is the real barometer of goal scoring greatness in Winnipeg for an NHL player.
Hey, either way, Mark Scheifele's got 328 career goals. That's a lot of goals. 778 points. He's in the first year of that long-term extension. Like, he could end up with a lot of points. Not only being the leader for the Jets, 1.0 or 2.0 franchise, but in NHL history, someone was messaging me. I think it was Maddie Lang saying, "Hey, like, he could end up with 1,300 points. Like, could Scheifele be up there among the leaders?" And you look at all the people who have that many career points; they're all in the Hall of Fame. I was like, you know what? I never even considered that as a possibility. But consistency, longevity. Mark Scheifele's certainly looking at that. He's had a couple seasons with injuries, but for the most part, he's been 70, 80-point guy and on his way to some career highs this year. So that would be a cool. We've had some cool moments at the WST games this year. Brian Little night, that game where the Jets steamrolled the Panthers. I mean, every game has been a win. The Dylan DeMello winner against Seattle was a season highlight. I think we could again another great game, and the Jets just keep winning at home. So odds are you're going to see a win if you've been to a Winnipeg Jets game this year. I'm looking forward to seeing everyone. I see so many people in chat saying they're coming to the game and sitting with us. So I just got to pick my wardrobe, and we'll be all set for tomorrow.
Yeah, I cannot wait as well. And yes, the Jets have a winning streak to continue. So does WST. Mm-hmm. We have to get to 5-0, 6-0 overall. If you go back to the Calgary game last year, 7-0, I guess, if we want to include the watch party in Detroit. But we'll just focus in on our games of the month. 4-0 so far this season, hoping to make it 5-0, heading into the Four Nations break and Super Bowl weekend tomorrow. WinnipegJets.com/WST if you want to grab one of the last tickets available for the event. That is going to do it for us today, gang. Great stuff with Chris Meaney. He's one of my favorite guys to talk to. Shout out to our buddy Jeremy. He was very close friends with Chris, despite Chris being in Halifax. Both of those guys are big Eagles guys, so I'll be hearing it from them on the weekend, I'm sure, heading up to the big game. Great stuff with Justin Dunk on the Canadian Football League early on in the program, and it's always a pleasure welcoming our pal Murat from The Athletic to the show. That is going to do it for us. Tomorrow, though, we got a banger. We're going to talk Super Bowl, Davis Sanchez, Lee Hacksaw Hamilton coming on, and we'll also get ready for Jets Islanders and welcome in Eric Comrie to the program as well to talk about the shutout, the season so far. And I know Comrie, big sports guy, he'll have a take on the Super Bowl as well. And of course, marbles to kick off the weekend before we see you at the rink tomorrow night. That is going to do it for us. Thanks again to all the sponsors of Winnipeg Sports Talk that make the show happen each and every day. And appreciate you all for making us a part of yours. Have a great one tonight. We'll see you tomorrow for a big Friday show heading into Jets Islanders tomorrow right here on Winnipeg Sports Talk.
Oh my God! Oh! Shut it down! Let's go home!
Thanks for tuning in to Winnipeg Sports Talk Daily. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast feed at winnipegsportstalk.com.